market. They take like a Franklin, and Franklin's got like 40 lots left in the market in total. But they sold 40 lots in all 2012. So frankly, talk about, you know, being out of supply. Franklin's on the edge of what's of having no supply, you know, as a market. So, you know, that could be a market. We're one of the first ones who would see some new development happen, you know, overall. But again, the model's still challenging. It's very challenging from a retail price versus cost, and it's going to take everybody working together, including the public officials, to actually make stuff happen.
I would just comment to go along with that, I think the number one challenge we've got is the time frames necessary for development. Even if we all up here today decide, wow, there's a lot of builders here, apparently there's some demand out there, it still takes 12 months to deliver a finished lot. I mean, no matter how hard we try, the communities, and I was at that meeting John was referencing, it was at his office actually, and there were a few municipalities there, and without mentioning municipalities by name, I'll just give you an example. I was in one just recently. We just got a piece of land tied up. It's a relatively small project. It's going to be between 22 and 25 lots. I went in, the community said this is the first concept plan that's going to be on an agenda in 6 years in our community. And this is a good, I mean, it's a good market area. I said, well, that's pretty exciting. So when can we get on for a concept plan? You know, I have the old concept plan from the site, so I'll just turn it around. Here it is. You know, can we get on the agenda in February? 35-day submittal time frame, and since we were a few days past, and these, by the way, the staff was really nice, okay, so it wasn't like they didn't want it, they were really excited about this development. 35-day submittal time frame, we're not on an agenda until early April. Because there's a 35-day submittal deadline, and that's just what the ordinances are, and so that's what we have to abide by. When you hopefully get approval of that concept plan, you can't turn around and get on a May agenda. You can't get on the next agenda until June. So what happens is some of these deadlines in these communities, they push you, even though they really want to work with you, it doesn't matter because they have rules in place that unless you go about changing those rules, which also takes time, they would have to waive their requirement, which also doesn't happen all that often. It just takes a long time. And the biggest fear from my perspective, and we've got 5, 6 different development projects right now that we're in some phase of entitlement, to even get to a point where you've got a preliminary plat approval and rezoning in hand, which is really the key metric for us as developers, where we can then come out to all of you builders and say, hey, we got this project we actually think we're going to develop. Even to get to that point, you're talking about $1,000 a lot probably in hard cost that's gone. I mean, you're never going to get it back. So if you get shot down, you're done. And taking those kinds of risks, in the good old days, you know, you'd throw 15 balloons in the air and hope 5 of them float. And then you lose money on those other 10, but it was okay because the other 5 made up for it. Now, I don't want to float balloons in the air and start spending 20 grand in entitlements unless I'm pretty certain it's going to work. So for me, the biggest fear is how much are we going to extend ourselves and doing entitlement work without knowing that we actually think it's going to happen, and how much capital are we willing to put out there before we actually know that something's going to work. So that's probably the scary part, is spending all the money before you actually know something's going to happen. And then of course, you can't go out to the builders to see what the demand is until you have something to actually talk about. So I think that'll be the number one hurdle, at least for us, is having the guts to pull that trigger.
John, can I interject to that?
Absolutely, please.
At the same time, the inventory that's being bought by developers, bank-owned, bankers don't always necessarily know what they're selling. They may think a preliminary plat is in existence and wetland delineations are in existence, but those timelines come and go. Preliminary plats in most communities are 1 year, maybe 2. Wetland delineations are 5. We're 8 years into a slowdown in the market. So there are still people trying to sell product out there that they think is shovel ready, and it's truly not. And then going to Matt's point, it's not $1,000 a lot, you just multiplied it. Because you're wasting time just educating the seller to bring it up to that point of which they think their value's at. But yet they want to close in 30 days. And a lot of people don't realize that. You know, and a lot of communities don't realize that. They think it's still on the shelf, it's good, but you know, when they dust off their regulations, as Matt was explaining, they're realizing it's not that good. And it's going to take additional time. And that's additional risk. I'm not floating 15 balloons, I'm floating 5 and hoping the 5 all make sense. So I don't think that realization is altered by communities and or some of the sellers out there.
Why don't we got another approximately 40 minutes left of conversation here, if my timing is correct, right? So what do you guys think about letting the panel talk for another 10 minutes on something they want to bring up? Or do we want to start bringing audience participation? Okay?
Whatever the group wants to do, fine with us.
So why don't you guys hit 10 minutes on something that you guys want to bring up that hasn't been asked yet, and leave 30 minutes for conversation?
You had asked the other half of the question, how are banks or how is Waukesha State Bank evaluating loans today? So I thought I'd circle back to that and not have too long of a single conversation. Another way of putting that perhaps is what have we learned in the last few years? You know, global cash flow I think is very important, and there's an irony that we as an industry I think didn't neglect that for manufacturing companies or customers, but we did get sloppy for developers and builders. And so that's here to stay, I think, or hopefully it'll be here to stay. I think that was part of the excess in the market. You know, if you look further at that, then besides just saying global cash flow is where you need to be, for a manufacturer, yeah, they may have seen sales drop in 2009, but it comes back. They can cut some of their expenses as well. There's not the same flexibility for a developer. And so when you get an appraisal, if you got it back in 2007 and it says, we'll assume 5 lots a year are sold, you'd count that in your cash flow analysis. But even if lots start selling again, can you comfortably count lot sales as income, or should you be excluding that or discounting it heavily and doing your global cash flow analysis? So that's part of the challenge, and you can apply the same challenge if you look at a builder in 2012, let's say, and they sold 2 spec homes last year, but they've got 2 others that have been on their books for 3 years. Can you really count that as a revenue? Because what if they build 2 more and they don't sell just like the last 2? So in my mind, I think banks are treating income from sale of lots and sale of specs more strictly and more cautiously than they're treating other forms of income, such as construction for customers, or if you are looking at a manufacturer. So that's a challenge. So John, when you said there's going to be more partnerships, I think that makes a lot of sense because it's pulling some of the risk out without requiring as big of an equity injection up front. What else have we learned from all this? Well, the first thing I'll comment on is housing, I think, was a lot more resilient perhaps than was feared, at least in our local market, especially nice housing. We took back a number of spec homes and we didn't lose a dollar on any of the spec homes we took back. We took back homes that had a wart or 2, and warts really matter in a tough market. So I'm thinking of a very cute bungalow that we took back in Waukesha in 2009 that appraised out at a much higher level than we sold it for because it was a shared driveway. That was the only thing wrong with it. Everything else about this house was adorable, but we just got hammered on that. And we've seen that continually, that if there's any wart on that property, you get hurt. But the nice thing about spec homes is they're new homes. And they've sold easily when we've had the bad fortune, and when our customers had the bad fortune, that comes back to the bank. So I don't think we're as scared, at least Waukesha State Bank is as scared to lend on spec homes as perhaps others might be. But we have a little bit more hesitancy to run out and do a subdivision right now. Would we do a subdivision now? I don't see why not, but we'd be looking for global cash flow that probably wouldn't be dependent on the sale of the lots. So that's probably a high bar to ask, but if you had a group that had the ability to carry it with or without lot sales, sure, we'll do it.
What do you want to bring up that we haven't talked about
You know, just a lot of what you're hearing up here is hesitancy, I think, from all of us. And I guess 2 things I just thought of as Ty was talking to. One of them is if you're a builder and you don't want to get into development, which I don't blame you at all, there's some good parts of it and there's some parts that are absolutely obnoxious to deal with. But homeowners associations being one. If anyone knows how to fix those, let me know, because I'd probably develop more land if I didn't have to deal with them. But in any case, if you're looking for land in specific locations, please call developers that you know. Call us, call Tim, call John, call developers that you know, and just start the conversation. Say, I really need inventory. This has been a historically good location for me. There's really a shortage here. My sales team doesn't have inventory. What can we do? How can we participate? You know, we have $50,000 to contribute. Is that enough to do something to jumpstart this? I mean, there's ways to do this stuff, but we need to hear from the builders too to say, this is where we want you to go. Do you have anything there? Because a lot of us have properties that we know about that are developable. We're just kind of sitting because we don't view there being really a need today. The second thing that I think is really positive right now in the economy, interest rates are so low, so obviously buyers are buying properties, and it is allowing us to hopefully deal with some of these price increases we're facing because money is really cheap right now. The thing that's really good about that is people with capital do not have the ability to earn a real safe return just by sticking it into a money market. And I don't know a lot of people with a reasonable amount of cash that want to go stick it in the stock market right now. I mean, today, there's no way I would go put a lot of money in the stock market when it's back at nearly an all-time high, and I don't know many people that would. Now, when it was down at 8,000 points, the Dow, well then sure, maybe you take a risk on it. I don't think people really are counting on that for a true 8 to 10% long-term return. I think people are skittish after what we all went through here the last 6 or 7 years. So I think there's a lot of people out there, and I know you guys have found a lot in raising capital and things. I think there's a lot of dollars sitting out there right now. Talk to your network of people and figure out if you can pool some capital together to do these projects, or bring some capital to the table for those of us who are ready, willing, and able to do these projects. And I think a lot more will happen a lot faster. And returns of 6 to 10%, I think, are very reasonable type of returns or expectations that can be met with land development projects today that are properly capitalized.
Just a word of encouragement, in our business park business, we do a lot, try to bring companies to the state of Wisconsin and try to attract companies. And one thing that I will say from the state perspective, the state administration right now is very aggressive on creating job growth, very engaged. When we have a customer or client that's looking to move into the state of Wisconsin, they're all over it. So that's an encouragement. I mean, we need, ultimately, you need job growth is what creates, economic vitality of the area. It has all kinds of ripple effects in our economy, and having job growth is important. So we have an administration that gets it, and that's a real encouragement. We had one company that from Japan was looking at one of our projects down in Racine, and they rolled out the red carpet, for this company. And unfortunately, it didn't come together, but it's just a very aggressive, proactive, fully engaged, administration. So that's an encouragement for us all, because jobs make a difference. More jobs, more money, more houses, more development, it all works together. So I think that's an encouragement. I guess the other thing, just to give you a sense of some creativity, what we're doing right now is we're actually pairing our land investments with income-producing assets. So it's, what we did, we raised $50 million in a fund, and we're buying 10 to 15 apartment buildings, office, industrial, retail type stuff, and then we've taken 10% of the capital, or $5 million in that fund, to do land. So if investor invests in land, the thing with land that gives everybody heartburn is there's no guaranteed cash flows here, which you're for time. So we're trying to blend the concept of income-producing assets to get recurring revenue every month with a land investment. So again, it gets back to, we just got to do things a little differently. Again, the overriding theme is we're all risk adverse. I mean, we've all, and rightly so, right? I mean, this has been kind of crazy, and we have risk adverse. So how do you get over that risk, and how do you feel comfortable stepping out and taking risk again? And again, trying to find ways to mitigate that risk overall.
I'm going to take a little different tack. I talked about the municipalities, and how many of you are involved at a municipal level? Plan commission, elected official, anything more? Park board, review boards, we probably have like 6 people, 7 people here. This is where you can have a big impact in your local community. There are almost always people that are looking, or communities that are looking for help with something. Go in there and participate. Get in there and encourage them to change their ordinances to make it easier, to make it better, to lower their fees, to change the way they get those fees from the consumers. That's one way you can do it. They have ordinances in place that are very onerous in many communities. You can ask any one of us. There's some no-touch zones that we won't even go near because it's just toxic. It's not even fun to deal with those communities, and you won't get anywhere. So those areas, they could turn about, and they'd have some incredible development opportunities that are close in Waukesha County, and some of them were at the table with us, and some of them would surprise you that they would be encouraging development. But we need more of that. We need this takes a groundswell of people in this room, in this community of contractors and builders and developers. We need to really get involved as deeply as we can to help ourselves. Not just helping me, because it may not help me, it may not help Tim or Matt or anybody else in the room, but it's a start and a step in the right direction.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and, I'm sorry. go ahead.
Actually, I've got one other thing I just wanted to lobby everybody on, and I didn't want to not get the chance to do that. There is a law that's been on the books for many years in Wisconsin that I would like to see changed. And a couple of years ago, I was pushing that through the Wisconsin Bankers Association, our lobbyist group, and they said, yeah, we're hearing that from a lot of banks, and they sounded it out a little bit, and they came back and said, all the builders and developers, they don't want that law to change. Because it's better for them. And I said, I don't think it is better for them. I think they're seeing this wrong. But the WBA folks said it's not going anywhere. But let me lay out what it is, and you can decide for yourself whether this is good for bankers and developers or simply good for bankers. And that is redemption periods and foreclosure. If we're foreclosing on a spec home, and if we waive deficiency, it's a 3-month redemption. Now, that doesn't mean it takes 3 months to get it done. It probably takes 6, 7, or 8 months, assuming no bankruptcy. It takes a while. But the period after you get your judgment till you can hold the sheriff's sale must be at least 3 months. But if you're foreclosing on a house that is 21 acres and 1 acre of it is